So the task for this week was looking at, again, a large data set. This time it was looking at car accident data. Online, either on Blackboard or on my website, there were two CSV files full of car accident data, and a text file with a key to work out what all the codes meant. You had to analyse them, plot some graphs and produce some reports. So you were using the functions that we looked at in the first sessions. You're also to apply the key. So for instance here we've got the raw data in columns A to H. We've then got parts of the key that I've copied in here in J to K, so that's just analysing the vehicle type, and then I've used a count if statement to get those values. So equals count if the range is A to A and the criteria B, there has to be a 0. It's counting how many zeros in column A. I can copy that down. Similarly, I've got a series of points here. I'm looking at the engine capacity in this section. So the engine capacity is just stored as raw numbers. Again, I'm going to need to work out what that engine capacity is. So I'm going to do that's interesting. It seems to, I think because I've saved it as a CSV file, I've lost the formulae. But what I've done is I've done another count if, so I've categorised each of these engine capacities as a particular category between 0 and 500, 500 and 1000, 1000 and 1200. I'm then going to plot the number of those engines involved in a crash against the midpoint of that category. So I've got one set of continuous data in this area, and I've got one set of discrete data with categories in that area. So I'll plot two graphs and then show some basic features of Word as well that might be useful in report writing for coursework. So to plot a graph, select all of the data you want to plot. I'm going to remove my 0 values because they're not particularly interesting. I'll leave pedestrians in for now. I'm going to insert, I can choose whichever sort of graph I want. I'm going to choose a column graph. There were some specific graphs requested for your work, and there was also some specific instructions like sorting them into highest to lowest. Okay, so if you want to use the sort feature, it's on the data tab, and there is a sort feature that's greyed out because I'm actually selecting a graph at the moment. But you could sort it, and it's recommended you sort it before you display it. It makes it look a bit neater. I'm not going to sort it because you can work out how that works, I'm sure. And then right click, select data, and for series 1, this series I've selected, I want to tell it which the horizontal category the labels are for this data. So I can highlight to there, and it will apply those horizontal labels for me. A little bit squashed up at the moment, so as I click OK, I can go on my graph tools, I can move my chart into a new sheet, and that displays everything proportionally a little bit better. I can drag things around and change sizes. I can remove grid lines. If I want to add them back, I can add the grid lines or a legend. I don't really need a legend with only one set of data, so I can delete that and again a little bit more space. One thing you might want to do if you've got an extreme number of data in one particular category is you might want to change the axes, you might want to change the spacing of the axes, you might want to make it a logarithmic axis. Okay, so logarithmic axis, and suddenly we've got the data filling much more of the graph, and that's much more useful to be able to compare figures comparatively. One thing I talked about, if you've got to print these graphs for assessments, might be worth printing them. You're probably going to print in black and white to save money. It's often a good idea, rather than printing this as it is in black and white, to change the colour in the design view. So there's a built-in black and white option that you can just click, and that changes everything to a grayscale for you. If you've got several of these bars, you might want to select the shading, because two shades of grey might be too close together to be able to distinguish. So you could click on the bars, right click, and you can format the data series, including the fill colour. And if you're using a more recent version of Excel, so Excel 2010 onwards, then this doesn't pop up in a separate box. Instead it pops up as a tab. If I remove that, pops up as a tab just down there at the right hand side, but it's all the same options. So I can select a solid fill. I can choose which colour, which shade of black or grey I would like. You can also add some axis labels. So to the primary, horizontal, and the vertical axis, and whether I want it rotated or not. I can just click on these and edit them. So type of vehicle, frequency, and they might be a little bit small if I'm putting them into Word, so I might want to make the font slightly larger. And similarly for this one. And you can do the same with your labels for the categories. Make it larger if you wish. But if you make it too large, you're going to make your data very small. What you might wish to do instead is to leave these as numbers on the x-axis, and then put a key in underneath your table in any report you produce. Once you've got that, you can click it, you can copy it, and then in Word, you can go into Word and you can paste. So if I hit paste, I get the graph. That graph has the same options to edit because it's a full live Excel graph that's linked to Excel. If I want to change that slightly, so I don't want it linked to Excel, I want it to be a fixed image, I can right click. So I can't in this version. In newer versions of Word you can right click, you can paste special, and you can choose to paste it as just an image. And that's dropped in exactly the same graph, but it's fixed now as a JPEG in your document. So the advantage of that is it will all scale proportionally and it won't lose any of the formatting features. If it gets too small, everything will scale down equally. The disadvantage is you can't edit it now, so it's locked in that particular format. Okay. One thing I didn't put on here is a title. I didn't put a title on here because I can add those, but I'll show you the functions of Word later. I'll finish with the graph plotting first. So the other graph that we're going to plot is a scatter graph. So I'm going to take my frequencies, insert a scatter graph, but I want to plot those points against, again, a series of x values. Those x values are going to be my midpoints that I defined earlier for my engine categories. So the first category is between 0 and 500 cc, so the midpoint for that's 250 cc. So you can see there's a big cluster of accidents happening at this far end, and very few happening down at the very large engine size. This top engine size is almost an outlier. Again, format the axis, make it logarithmic. And again, fills a bit more of the screen for us. We can look for trends and we can start to analyse that. We can delete the series. We can change the colour of the bullets in exactly the same way. We can make them grayscale. We can change their shape to be crosses. So we've got all sorts of marker options. If you're using black and white and you're using crosses, you might want them slightly bigger. You might want them slightly darker. You might want lines in between them. Okay, so you might want a dot to dot join up the points, but more often you'll use a trend line. So if you use a trend line, you can right click and add a trend line, and then you get all sorts of options there as well, whether it's a linear trend line, a logarithmic, polynomial, so x squared, x to the 3, x to the 4. You can plot equations for that line as well. It gives you the equation of the line it is plotting. They're not always good fits though. Let's remove the trend line because that's not showing us anything useful. And again, I can move that into another chart. I might want to delete the lines because that might make it a bit easier to read. You might not think so. You want to make the axes slightly bigger, I would suggest, and I would suggest this is actually not excessively clear. You might want to make the crosses slightly darker. That's a very quick introduction to plotting graphs. I'll make a second video where I introduce the functions and some of the features of Word that help us with report writing.